Well, delighted to welcome Hugh Treharne, CYC Hall of Famer, 50-year plus member. Hugh, when did sailing begin for you, or how did you get involved with sailing?
Well, as a child, we lived in a boat shed down in Fairlight on the northern end of Harbour near Manly, and my father bought a little old-fashioned sailboat. It was about 16 or 17 feet long, and it had like 300 or 400 kilos of lead on it, and old skiff sails cut down. And Jerry Abbott, a friend of my father, Lawson Abbott, and I, his son Lawson, and I and my brothers learned how to sail on this little boat in North Harbour, and Jerry was quite an experienced sailor, and it was a wonderful upbringing for us to learn from an expert, and in such a beautiful setting. It was wonderful.
And it was a skiff with a lead keel, was it? Did it have a?
It wasn't a skiff, it was a chine boat, rather like to look at it, like a Vaucluse senior chine boat, but it was heavier constructed, and it had cut down sails off a skiff, and about 200 or 300 kilos of lead bolted onto the side of a wooden keel for ballast. And in the Fairlight area, there's a hell of a little kids running around it. When I was growing up, nobody had any cars, and all the kids were just playing on the nature strip between the line of houses and North Harbour, all the way from Balgowlah, Conduit Street, the northern end or the eastern end of the park there, all the way to Manly is a mile or so, and it was a big wide nature strip that was our backyard, and the boat opened up the whole of the bay, Store Beach, and we used to go camping and whatever. Anyway, there was dozens and dozens of kids who learned how to sail, and on this little yacht. And Jerry Abbott showed us all, and Lawson Abbott, his son, and I went on a bit into the 16-footers and what have you.
That's at Manly, 16-footers?
Yeah.
Yep.
But in those days they had open skiffs, as they still do, mind you, but they didn't have any buoyancy tanks. They're made out of timber, and most of the boats were built by the return servicemen who owned them. All the tradesmen, every one of the people who had a skiff was a tradesman. The painters and plumbers and electricians and whatever you want to think, like bricklayers, whatever. And everyone at that time couldn't afford to get a boat unless they built it themselves. Mm-hmm. And I remember when we built our first 16-footer, we built the thing and got back in some fairly modest prize money that we got from the club, and all the money we spent buying the materials we got back in prize money, so it didn't cost us anything. Mm. And that we were blessed, I guess, in the fact that we had some way of paying for it. It didn't cost much because we did all the work ourselves, and we made the fittings, and I learned how to splice wire, so we spliced all the wire rigging and standing rigging and halyards and whatever. It was a pretty cheap way to get a boat, but I mean, we built our own skiffs, and but talking about this little wanderer yacht, there was literally hundreds of kids who learned how to sail, and there was no sailing club at the time. So my father and a bloke named Tom Flower, who lived up the head of the bay, got together and they started up North Harbour Sailing Club, which is still there. Gee, I don't know how long it's had a fleet of small dinghies racing, and still has, since like 60 years ago or 70 years ago. And it's a beautiful part of the world, and it's quite hidden in the bay from the hard sou'westers and wintertime winds. And it's pretty much open to the east and the northeast. So the westerlies used to blow like hell out of the bay, and we couldn't go out because unless they had a launch to pull the kids back, there was a risk of going out their heads. And I remember one time that did happen when we had a bad storm. It blew a Gwen 12 with a couple of kids on it. It was tumbling its way out through their heads, and they could see the houses on the northern beaches around the outside of the north end, so they're out a little bit. And that was a weird thing. I had a little cedar skiff that one of the members of the club had built years ago, and it was we called it Peanut. It was a 8-foot long, beautiful little cedar clinker thing with a snub nose. And
to any design or just a one-off?
It's a bit like a sabot in shape.
Right.
And single little sail, I suppose about the same size as a sabot. And I was going to school at the time, and a mate of mine from school and I were on the boat when a terribly vicious and sudden westerly wind came through, and it came out of North Harbour and blew us over toward the rocks south of where the Skiff Club is at Manly there, out toward Smedley's Point there. And by the time we lowered the sail on the little halyard and blew in toward the shore, by the time we got there, the wind had stopped and it went calm. And it happened once more when I was sailing an 18-footer up near Taylor's Bay there. We saw an 18-footer jump out of the water, and I could see the land underneath it, before it hit the drink on its side. So we just tipped our 18-footer over in that time, and they don't last very long. But I remember one of the blokes tied up to the totem pole, and then lowered his sails and tied up to the totem pole when this thing happened. And the story is that he pulled his sail back up and went to the finish, and I wouldn't finish him because they said that he hit the
totem pole. I can see that coming. Yeah.
Anyway.
But Huey, so from there for the 16s, ocean racing, how did that become part of your life? With Middle Harbour, with Norm Brooker? Was that where?
Oh, well, we started sailing on Norm Brooker's Swanson 36. It was a plug, a boat that I made a plug for.
There was Moonbird.
The Moonbird, yeah. And the shape of the boat was pretty good. It was a beautiful shape, actually.
But how did you get into ocean racing? Did you know Norm, or did you just graduate?
Dave Linton, who was working with the old man in the boat shed as a shipwright, my brother Ian Bomber, he started his apprenticeship as a shipwright at Garden Island, and when he was halfway through, he sought permission from the authorities to transfer his apprenticeship to Dave Linton, who was the shipwright who assisted in. He was quite skilled, but one of the jobs he did as a tradesman himself was he built Even, which is a 60-foot or 65-foot boat on the harbour in those days. And so Dave was an 18-footer sail with Vic Robinson, and it turned out that Bomber started, my brother, his nickname's Bomber, got into the 18s, and and somehow the owner of the boat that they were sailing on, a fellow named Bill Fox, had a blue with the owner, with the skipper. I don't know quite what happened, but it's a funny old deal with those. In those days, there was gambling and what have you, and I don't know, something happened. He didn't do what he was told or something, and he had a blue. And suddenly, when I was 17 years old, I was invited to go and steer this thing.
And that was the Fox, wasn't it?
The Fox,
18,
yeah.
Mm.
So we did that for a while, and we were sailing the 16-footers on Saturdays and the 18-footer on Sundays, and sometimes we took the skiff to the various regattas around the harbour, and eventually we got a car and we built ourselves a trailer so we could take our skiff to Belmont and Toronto. And the sport was terrific. We went down to Botany Bay, never went to Lake Illawarra in the skiff, it was too far for us. But we got we went to St George and George's River in Yarra Bay in those days. And of course on the harbour there was Drummoyne Sailing Club, Middle Harbour Sailing Club and Manly, and the Greenwich Sailing Club had stopped sailing skiffs by the time I started, and I didn't know much about that, but there was big fleets in those days. I remember sailing in 2 regattas where there was 107 entries.
So while you were doing this, you got involved with the ocean racing with Norm on
Yeah,
on
well, we
Moonbird
sailed with the Moonbird with Norm at Middle Harbour Yacht Club, and he was doing the CYCA races, the Saturday offshore, short offshore, around the Coogee and up to Long Reef or somewhere, and occasionally up to Lion Island, and they had Bird Island and Tom Thumb Island and Cabbage Tree Island races and Montague Island. So it was all a bit all sudden for us to, as young kids, to get into all this. But Norm was a very skilled sailor, and his son Doug was a bit younger than us, but he was also skilled, and Dave Linton was crewing on the boat, and that's where we got to meet the Swanson brothers, and we had a lot of fun and lifelong friendships with those 3 shipwright brothers. Went to Hobart twice on that boat, and then he built a bigger boat, Seawind, I think it was called. It was a Sparkman and Stevens design thing, and then I didn't sail on that boat, but I really appreciated learning the seamanship that I did from Dave Linton and Norm Brooker.
Then you got on another strong boat with Ragamuffin and another strong skipper in Syd.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we got an 18-footer, and we a dear friend Bobby Holmes introduced us to 18-footers. After we'd sailed the Fox, we concentrated on 16s for quite a while, and as an owner fronted up, and Bobby found out that he's looking for a crew, and asked Bobby's advice about who might be able to round it all together, and lucky he gave me the opportunity. So this mate of mine, Phil Kroll, I'm getting a lift with tomorrow to go to Bobby Holmes' funeral. He was sailing on Moonbird, but he also sailed on this 18-footer with us, and was named after a dear old friend of Sam Hatfield, the owner, and Thomas Cameron it was called. I never met the man, but he was a close family friend, and Sam named the boat after him, and virtually just gave us open slather to do what we liked to get as fast as boat as we could. So we asked Hugh Cook to let us use his mould that he had designed and assisted in the building of the current travel lodge that Bob was sailing. And Ian Perdrio worked with a bloke named Ian Peden up in DY who built it, and we fined the bow up a little bit. We looked at Bobby's boat and it just looked a bit too much buoyancy in the bow, and it turned out that we made it finer and actually made it a better boat. And Sam was wonderful. He first of all wanted to sail on the boat, and then he found out that it was a bit beyond him. And we got Phil Kroll to make up the fourth fellow, and we had my brother Ian and Kevin Flower, one of the North Harbour boys from years ago before, and we went into the racing in the harbour just for one season actually. We got involved in other things after that, but it took us away from sailing on the Thomas Cameron. We only sailed one season with it, but...
And you won the 1970 World Championships in Thomas Cameron.
Well, we did actually, yeah. But we it was a real good boat, and the fact that we had been successful, it alerted Syd Fischer to the fact that some of these young blokes on the boat might be interested to try out for the crewing on the Ragamuffin. And
well, you had great success with Ragamuffin. Yeah. I mean, winning this Fastnet race, I mean, that must have been that
was
top of the list, or one of the...
The boat had beautiful sails. Joe Pearce made the sails for it. It had a 3-ounce spinnaker, and we set the spinnaker, and apparently nobody else did. We didn't know it. It was, it was blowing, and Noakesy and these blokes reckoned we'll give it a go. And Hammery and I were struggling with this bloody 3-foot diameter, it was a 3.5-foot diameter stainless steel, slippery. And but with two of us was strong enough to be able to, to keep the bow moving safely under the spinnaker. And I'd learnt how to do that from Norm Brooker, and Bob Director said, you just got to keep the clews down and pull the luff tight, and then you've got to just steer it to keep the bow underneath the top of the mast. And I figured out that when I was a kid I used to stuff around with picking up a broomstick and balancing it on my finger, and then I figured that's exactly what we're doing. You've got the top of the mast, and when it wants to go that way, you've got to just put the boat under it. And when it slows down, gets to the end of its thing, and it's going to go nowhere else except the other way. Yeah. And then it's going to come over, you've got to put the bow underneath that. And all you've got to do is just exactly what we're doing with the broomstick as a kid. If you don't put the bottom under the top,
capsize.
You lose it. Yeah. But if you can do that with a yacht, and we used to have able to get the bow wave going right up the point of the boat and going up the bloomin' on the Stormy Petrel, we had the bow wave separated by the centre post of the bow rail, like the pulpit. Yeah. So the bow would go up and you could see the nav lights onto the water, red and green, bright red and green, and the top of the pulpit was, only this far off the deck, but the waves were going up. But the pulpit rail, the vertical rail, was actually stopping the water that would otherwise be on the deck was separating it enough, so we didn't bury it.
Yeah. But you mentioned Stormy Petrel. You won the 1 Ton Cup with Syd in Auckland with Bomber was there, and Graham Newland, Potty O'Donnell,
and
Butch Dalrymple Smith. Yeah. Well, that was a good win because that was one of the most highly contested 1 Ton Cups of all time. Boats out of New Zealand were being built and trials here to select the team. Yeah,
quite an impressive international fleet.
Yeah,
and the Graham Newland had a very close relationship with Olin and his brother, Olin Stevens. And
Rod Stevens.
Rod. Yeah. And we had the same design as 3 other boats that were built in New Zealand. But Graham Newland figured out that it would be better if it had bigger sail and sacrifice lightness by putting a heavier keel on it. And he put a lot of lead on it, extra lead, and sunk the boat, I think it was 5 inches or something, a hell of a lot of lead. It's about 4 or 5 tons.
Wow. More
lead. But it had such big sails, and in light wind, upwind, it was a rocket. And awful wind, it was a bit hard, and because of this, burying, dig a big hole in the water, but the fact that we had learnt from Norm Brooker how to steer downwind, it was not a big deal at all.
Yeah. So I'll move then from 1 Ton Cup wins to Half Ton Cup World Championship with Tommy Stevenson. You won that.
Oh, well, yeah. I was making sails at the time, and I'd made some sails for Tom's half-tonner that he had in Port Phillip. And he rented this, or chartered this beautiful little boat that Doug Peterson designed, and some bloke put them into production over there in the United States, and Tom got on to that fellow and got one ordered so he could use it in the Half-Ton Cup on condition that he would pay a fee for the renting of the boat, but then leave it there. Foxy Lady it was called. It had north sails, they were all well done, and it had a reef in the number 3. It was a full-size, full luff length number 3 that had the clew quite low to the deck, and the boat flew, and we raced against all these North Sails people. They had, at the time, North Sails was always has been, I guess, but it had a wonderful team of loft managers who were all gold medal bloody sailors, like there was Peter Barrett who sailed with Lowell North when they won the gold medal in the Olympics in California there, Los Angeles, and there was Dick Deaver and some bloke from Connecticut who ran the North Loft there, and Bertrand was there. He had, at that point, was working for North, but he hadn't actually established the North Loft in Melbourne. But they came from everywhere, all these North people, so it was I remember Tom Blackhall was the best of them, I thought. He steered his boat, and he was the hardest to beat, but we actually won both long races, and that gave us enough points to win overall, I guess. But there's something about that. It was snowing. I've never sailed in the snow before. I'd sailed in the Hobart with sleet, and since then, like you think you got down to it. It's not heavy snow, but I mean, bloody freezing. But in Chicago, we went out for a practice run. Tom figured that we needed to sail the course at night to figure out what it's like. And
this is when you went to defend the title, wasn't it? After you'd won in...
No, in Chicago.
Is that where you won the half-ton wheels? In Chicago?
In Chicago, yeah. Anyway, we went out and did this overnight thing, and it was bloody freezing. But it was snowing, so